Right, we're starting to look really good right now. Got a nice group of people going on. I hope all the panelists are ready. We'll be starting very shortly now. Personally, I like the number 25. I think that'd be a good starting point in a bit. Might as well start right now. Really more people should be coming. So welcome everybody. My name is Lauro. I will be tonight's moderator for this event. And welcome to, the Rise Up in Your Career discussing diversity in panel. I'll be introducing everyone very shortly, but once again, I'll be your moderator, and we have three lovely panelists that are going to be joining us for today. Also reading the chat, thank you, Suk. I appreciate it. All right. So, as y'all may notice, we have some people pinned in our Zoom chat to our right. You're going to be seeing Noelle Rivera, Contessa Hoskin, and Julio Govreau. So, this is a little bit about us. A little bit about Rise Up is that we are you know a program designed for under-resourced people. I in fact was a student of this program, and I've recently graduated in the fall of 2020. So one of the things that they provide to you is a lot of work skill sets, soft skills, hard skills, office skills, and it's all provided by a volunteer-based group. So I had the chance to get to know a few of you. That's why I did recognize a few names. I would like to address Suk, who's in the chat with us, Michelle. Those were two of the folks that I got to personally meet over time. But in short, this they provide boot camps if you would like to brushing up on some skills you have. Perhaps you need to know a little bit more office skills that are more up to date. That's one of the primary things that they offer here at Rise Up. But aside from that, it's very nationwide. We got people across the U.S. Volunteering, attending, graduating, people having success stories that they've had careers come in out of this program. So that is the primary objective with Rise Up. But today we're going to be talking about diversity. One of the most pressing things in today's workforce. A little bit about myself as the moderator is that I graduated from UCLA in 2019 with a bachelor's in Spanish. And some of my hobbies include photography, and that's actually my other source of income, something I actually got to learn with Rise Up, different ways to make income. And at the moment, I am currently trying to pursue a registered nurse license. Ideally, I'd like to be a nurse practitioner. But enough about me. Let's get to know a little bit about our panelists. So up first we have Julio Govreau. As you can see in the title, he is a VP of People. And a little bit about him, as we get to see, is that he was a Marine Corps veteran for over 15 years. And yes, he is a Vice President of People Operations at LaunchCode. So what he does is that he's responsible for overall human resources strategy for the organization. But outside of work, he enjoys, serving at local nonprofits, and at the moment he is a graduate at Edgewood College, focusing on a Doctor of Educational Leadership. So I'd like everyone to address Julio. He's a great person. And up next, we have Contessa. As you can see a little bit about her, she is a business executive leader. And what's really great about her is that she is one of our most decorated panelists over here. So, she has been with over, 20 years of experience. She holds a bachelor's of science degree in electrical engineering from McKinsey State University. But she also has a lot of other awards outside of that: mentoring and excellence, technical honors, service and corporate performance. But above that, she's also a great motivational speaker. She is a published author and an avid runner. Something I'm noticing that with all of us here, Julio and Tessa are avid runners. And last but not least, we got Noelle, who is a data analyst and actually one of the volunteers here as a Rise Up. As stated, we do have volunteers here. A little bit about Noelle is that, she is, an early career Filipina. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Information and Technology. She had her honor thesis in Filipino American assimilation and other ways that Phil-Ams, Filipino Americans, can reclaim their culture. Something about her is that in her free time, she enjoys volunteering, playing the ukulele, and walking her dog. That's a little bit about our panelists. So now let's actually get into the discussion. So, some things to keep in mind is that we're going to be talking some things about code switching, avoiding tokenization, that's a pretty big one, and defining our boundaries, among other topics. So, everyone that's here present in our event, feel free to use the chat to ask questions to the panelists, including myself as the moderator. These are just some of the topics, but the key point here is that we want to talk diversity. How do we avoid things, regarding tokenization? That might be something for a lot of us experiencing, in today's workforce. Or perhaps maybe there is a way we can negotiate our salary. We have to know our worth. Our backgrounds, our, an aptitude to still learn, as first gen for myself, is something that we're still developing. So, without further ado, if anyone has questions, always feel free to ask in the panel. So, up first, I was just wondering for the panelists, can y'all tell me a little bit about yourself? I did give a quick description to everyone, but, what makes you feel diverse in your workforce, in your area of expertise? The microphone is open to anyone.
So I'll go ahead and get started if that's okay. Thank you for that warm introduction, Lauro. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited about being here. So I really like that question. What makes me unique in regards to, from a diversity perspective, is I'm a Latino that came to this country when I was very young. My parents are originally from Mexico. And so they have always instilled this very strong work ethic that if you do great things and help others along the way, life is good. The other thing too that I consider myself as far as a diverse person in the workforce is I'm a veteran. I served my country in the Marine Corps. I'm a Latino who's also gay. And this is my first executive role. So I'm trying to help people be very comfortable at work. So I'm in charge of all HR functions. So I take that with great pride as far as making sure that we're striving towards making sure that everyone that works at LaunchCode has a strong sense of belonging and that we really welcome everybody with their true self when they come to work. So that's just a little bit about myself.
Thank you, Julio. Very
Sure.
comfortable, and also happy Pride Month.
Thank you.
Riley, perhaps
Yeah,
would
I
you
can
like
go.
to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll go next. So like Julio, I'm a first generation American. My parents immigrated here from the Philippines. My dad, when he was younger than my mom, in her late 20s. And so I bring that into the workforce. And then also I'm a woman and I work in construction and technology. So very old school industries, traditional, and a lot of white male people and leadership. And so not a lot of representation. And that's something that I've been working towards at my own company, just trying to help that build that out, even if I'm just starting out my career.
Thank you, Noelle. I appreciate that. Last but not least, Contessa.
Hi, Tessa Hoskin here. For me, although I'll say probably feel like a little bit from being a first generation, a little bit. I'm a Texas, Louisiana parent from each side, so everybody knows Louisiana is a complete different country by itself. So I'm totally a Creole cowgirl, and have always been in positions of being, I will say, the only or the few, whether that is African American female. It's really not been, and that's been pretty much my whole life. Well, for me, the first time I would say I had a culture shock was the first time I attended my predominantly all African American school, which wasn't until close to junior high. And that was a different look for me because that had never been the case. And so being a woman in technology, electrical engineering, doing, executive MBA, still you find yourself even in the boardroom. A lot of times I was a triple minority, the youngest, the only female, and the only African American.
Wow. So everyone that's attending, as you can see, diversity doesn't always have to extend just to race or even gender. As you can see, first generation, triple minority. That's a new concept I've never heard before. So let's keep this in mind that there's different ways to identify your diversity. Outside of your standard race, gender, there's a ton of ways in which people can find themselves, feeling just different from what is norm. But panelists, I have a question for y'all. Let me ask this, and anyone is welcome to take the microphone. But what questions can I ask in an interview to learn if their culture values diversity. So let's think about work culture. Let's think about, what are the values, the principles that are corporate, that a job, a career, a work environment is offering? Do they value diversity? Anyone is, welcome to talk.
I'll take that one. I'll say this, being on both sides of the house of being a person that's been a candidate, a prime candidate for especially executive positions, and also those who's looking to acquire talent. The one thing I can say is that the first thing I always look at who's on the board of directors and who's in the C-suites. That'll tell you everything you need to know a lot of times. Some companies, are trying to get there. They are, but that's the first thing that people look for. And now with, the internet, and so much information being out there, you have a lot of the younger generation that are doing their homework like never before and sharing those stories. It's on social media, who is, who isn't. And so that's a one good far way to say, because it's not about what they say, it's about what they show and what they do.
So
Heard. Go ahead.
I want to add some thoughts to that to Tessa's great points. Another aspect that I always look for when approaching this topic too is what information is there in the organization that supports the concept of diversity? Is it values? Is it a competency? Is it a behavior? Things that are coming out naturally during the interview process, because I want to know that information too. The other thing that I always share with candidates too is if you can get a tour of the facility, that also is very telling of the workforce that we have. If you can also arrange where you can have a discussion with the team that you would be working for or responsible for, that also is very telling as far as an organization's commitment to diversity, as far as what does the landscape look like to begin with. And lastly, I always like to ask for myself, I've asked this before, how will the organization make me feel welcome when I'm being approached for a role or I'm being considered for a particular role? Because I asked that as well, because as a Latino gay veteran, I want to know how you're going to welcome me as far as being part of your team. So that way it gives me a little bit of insight in regards to your approach and your overall philosophy when it comes to people that are different from the panelist or the interviewer in general.
And Noelle, if you'd like to add on,
Yeah.
feel free to add on.
Yeah, I don't have as much experience with applying for jobs or being on both sides of this coin, but yeah, I think going onto their website, like Tessa mentioned, and seeing who's on their leadership team, because it's just such a great representation of, is there room for upward mobility for you at this company? Yeah.
Now, check it out. I want just very quick advice from everyone because there's something, that came into my mind that I was been, asked. But how do you feel connected to your identity without feeling like you are a stereotype? So this will start leading into feeling tokenized to others. Just to give some context, how do you remain true to your roots while still, being a part of this work environment? So let's try to provide some advice, or perhaps, maybe there is something, a way to identify when you start to feel like a stereotype or begin to feel tokenized. Actually, can we start in reverse order? Noelle.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about this because something that I really struggle with as an Asian woman is that model minority complex. Like if I am doing good at my job, is it because, oh, she's another good Asian girl, in the workforce? And so something that I've been working on personally is recently we launched a diversity series, Lunch and Learn at my company, and I spoke about being Filipino and talking through that with other people and letting them know this is how I feel. And, being Asian or being Filipina is much more than what you see in the stereotypes. We're not all passive. We're not all just like straight A's, good at math. And so talking through that with other people and having those hard conversations can be very scary. It was very scary for me being that vulnerable, but I feel like coming out of it, I feel a lot better with it with my coworkers. And I know that they see me a little bit more as more than just that kind of stereotype. And then also recognizing, kind of the negative stereotypes associated with things such as like being passive. I used to have a really hard time speaking up for myself. And so that's something that I've been working towards and is something I talk about with my mentor, who's actually Tessa, a lot, and kind of like advocating for myself.
Thank you, Noelle. Just want, to let everyone know in the chat again, tokenization can feel very different. What are some stereotypes that you've experienced? I feel that can translate into the workforce, and I feel what you've addressed is something that we feel in our lives, growing up in, academia, school, and now the workforce. Even though the transition may be there, it's still relatively same story, different place. But very quickly, Julio, Contessa, any quick advice you can offer us, to either identify tokenization or, recognize that, you know what, I'm gonna stand my ground. This is who I am.
I could say for me, I've been there. So I will say for ladies, it's always a double-edged sword on how you perceive on certain things that you'll say and do that a man may get a pass at. Being African American female, you'll get the quick, you got to be careful because you get the quick angry Black woman type deal, which is not the case. You're just standing your ground. Now, from a tokenism standpoint, I will say I had an incident with a former employer way back when, where they were trying to promote diversity, but there was only about 2 or 3 of us in the company, and we kept getting put into the media. So their printed ads and everything else. And by the second or third time, I'm like, okay, that's enough, right? That's plenty enough. They just keep seeing the same faces over and over again. So yeah, it's about getting exposure, but not being exposed.
I like that.
I like that.
Getting exposure but not being exposed.
Or exploited, correct.
Mm.
I like that a lot. Julio, any quick remarks?
Sure. Couple of thoughts there too. I think we also need to create a safe space at work so people can be curious about you and ask you questions versus stereotyping you. So I have different likes as far as things that I do outside of work. And so people can stereotype some of those things as well. But if you create this psychological safety where people can be vulnerable and ask you questions from a curiosity perspective, because they're just naturally curious, that's one thing that I'll allow versus asking me stereotypical questions as far as some of the things that are associated with the way I look or the way I sound or the way that I was brought up. So having that space where people can ask questions and not be afraid, that's great. Now, you also, like Tessa said, you have to be respectful and mindful that we're all learning. So we're doing that at work right now where we have management and employees, and we're asking those very hard questions of each other as far as how to move forward with some of these issues that from a diversity perspective as well. So just having that space where you can be yourself, ask questions from assuming positive intent will be very impactful to everyone involved.
Thank you all. For the next question, I like to just keep, 2 panelists. We have a nice, very big chat going on. But very quickly, thoughts about code switching, how do you incorporate it? Or if not, how do you avoid it? Because I can see instances where you may feel comfortable with, a couple of people, maybe, start to integrate yourself further into the work company. So when do you find it practical, but at the same time, when do you see it unnecessary to do so? If I could have just 2 panelists answer this question.
That's a funny topic because I think this was one that I think people will put names to things, and it's been, I'll say, made fun of even on Saturday Night Live, right? When they showed the president, Barack, how he would shake hands with different people at different times. So those type of things happen. I think when people talk about code switching is when you have, somebody says, oh, okay, this person's being corporate here, but they're talking their slang or native language when they're around each other. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there really isn't anything wrong with that. And just because you know how to adjust to your settings, it's being aware of your surroundings. Now the question is, are you faking it? I think it's versus being genuine, or are you trying to fake something that you're not? That's the bigger part of it when it comes to saying, I'm trying to code switch.
Thank you.
So I'll
Would any
echo.
other panelists? Yeah.
Sure. I like to echo Tessa's comments. Great points to think about. And I also think that we are multidimensionals. Depending on the environment and the setting, I love that Tessa brought this up, is you're going to see different facets of us as an individual, as a professional, as a Latino veteran, as a gay man. So it just depends the context of the, and that's okay because we're multidimensional human beings. And so I always say, also preface this with, what are you trying to achieve based on the exposure that you're giving people in regard to that moment? What is your goal in regards to you interacting with somebody else, whether it's a professional presentation or whether you're being more relaxed in a social environment? what are you trying to achieve there? And it's okay that you have different goals based on the context of the interaction and the people that you're trying to interact or connect with.
So what y'all brought up was faking and also feeling comfortable with adjusting. So this is gonna be just a very quick open-ended question for everyone that's attending. But if you want like to either use the raise hand emoji or just type in the chat. But who here has felt imposter syndrome? That might be new to some people. So let me just give some context. If you know what imposter syndrome is, feel free to say in the chat or use the raise hand feature. Just let us know. Let's get an idea how people here. A little bit about imposter syndrome is whenever an individual feels as though they are not the person that they are. So an instance might be that you aren't working enough, that perhaps, your achievements are not your own. There is this very strong sense that there isn't enough. And I bring this into question because when we have a lot of first generation folks graduating from college and entering the workforce, first, I just want to ask with some advice, but also feel free to answer this part of the question. What is your advice for battling imposter syndrome as a minority? So, two questions right here. Feel free to answer this as you will. What's some advice for entering, first generation folks entering the workforce? But at the same time, how do you battle imposter syndrome? And I'd like to have Noelle, if you could take the microphone, since our other two panelists had a chance to speak in the previous one.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about specifically imposter syndrome because that's something that I deal with all the time, especially when I've started to take on more responsibilities and starting to talk to clients more. It's like, oh, are they putting me in front of clients because I'm a diverse face? Is something I worry about. And what really helped me talking about it with my therapist was she was like, look at all of the stuff that you've accomplished, and not only the stuff that you've accomplished, but all that it took to get here. And I have a really hard time with minimizing my accomplishments. So I actually write down like, this is the things I did and this is how I did it. It takes a lot of work and I've done a great job, and kind of leaving little reminders for myself around around my apartment and my journals. So that way I have that to look back to and reference when it does get to me.
I like that. I like that a lot, recognizing your achievements. And I like that you mentioned that you have a therapist. I will also be honest and mention that I also have my own therapist. And that's something that I have, tried to unlearn that, imposter syndrome, again, is a feeling that you may get, with, not recognizing your own achievements. Perhaps maybe having outside acknowledgement is great, but also having an acknowledgement from within that this is your achievement, this is your, accomplishments is equally as valid. I like to have one more person if they'd like to speak.
I was going to
Advice
say,
for first gen.
I want to take that one a little bit because that one touches on a few things. One, corporate America is great. Don't get me wrong, it is. You're gonna get the when you get into certain ranks and when people want to be A-type personalities and they're achieving, right? You kind of get the whole fake it till you make it sometimes, right? And sometimes they tell you, ready at the role. But there's a double-edged sword to that. And this is a conversation I've had with not only mentees, but peers as well. And I used to see this a lot with some of my peers a few years ago. When they talk about your personal branding and your brand management, what you get into the imposter syndrome is because a lot of people are trying to live up to a brand that they have out there, some brand that they put out there and they're trying to live up to it. So in essence, the brand that they put out there is managing them rather than them managing the brand that they are. And if you're going to be in that world, if you're going to chase it all day. And so it's people being understanding, know what brand you are and you manage to that. That right there will kill the imposter syndrome.
You know what? I like this conversation because I think it's addressing two things. We have a lot of first generation folks, as I'm noticing as the questions come in. So I specifically want to first address this to Contessa and then open this up to our other panelists. How do you first recognize what's your brand? Secondly, how do you go about that, as, diversity in the workforce? Because I'm starting to see a connection here. So, Noelle, or sorry, I apologize, Contessa, if you
Yeah,
could
I
add
mean,
on a little bit more.
absolutely. Honestly, it takes a minute for you to come into your own. So I'll say like Noelle. Noelle is just getting started out. So she's going to find her rhythm of what she's good at and where her strengths are. And so get a coach, get a mentor. to help you start to formulate, hey, here's what I'm good at, here's what I like doing, here's what I'm about, and what fits your strengths in your character and how you perform. And there's nothing wrong with being proud or confident. So confidence, especially on minorities, get quick to switch into arrogance, and it's not the same thing. So as long as you have that humility there, it always remains a confidence level, and don't let anyone shake that. If you're good at what you do, you know, you're not gonna worry. You're never gonna have that fear of that. You can stand up today, tomorrow, next week on that. But that was the thing I started to learn. And that doesn't matter just even on the person themselves. Everybody's trying to live up to the dream. If I don't have the BMW, if I don't have the size house, if I don't have this, then therefore I got to reach this for me to feel some type of way, rather than people understanding and being comfortable in really who they are and what they've accomplished.
I love this. I love that you also, differentiated, both confidence and arrogance. And I feel humility is something, that takes time to like really acknowledge, but thank you for bringing that up. If either Julio or Noelle would like to talk a little bit about branding yourself, go
Sure.
ahead.
I'll go next. So I love where this conversation is going. And I actually had a conversation during lunch about this topic. One of the things that I have worked with individuals before is I like to give them the following homework assignment. I always say to them, talk to 3 or 4 people that you trust and value their opinion of you because of your interactions with them in the past or in the present, and ask them, what am I good at? And you'll be surprised when you get all of this information back as far as either themes or areas that they have perceived you that you're really good at. And then use those so that way, as you continue to build that brand, as Tessa has been mentioning, then you partner up with that idea. So that way, again, you fortify that with all of the great experiences that you have in your background. The other thing too that I would say about that as well is once you have all that information and you've given it some time to reflect upon, also incorporate an elevator speech as how you introduce yourself. So that way, in about 10 to 15 seconds, a very succinct message, you're telling other people what you can do for them as far as the value that you bring. I always say, my name is Julio Govreau, and I'm pleased to meet you. I'm your potential partner, and I'm here to help you. And then people ask questions. Oh, potential partner, what do you mean? Well, let's talk about that. And so if you can incorporate some of these elements in regards to who you are, gather some feedback from the people that you really trust and value, that'll also help fortify that brand that you're trying to aspire to. And also, it always will be evolving. That's another thing about your brand. It's never going to be the same throughout your professional life. It's going to evolve and change because you change. So something to keep in mind as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to now transition, the questions from a little bit of tokenization, stereotypes, and branding. Let's just now imagine ourselves, we've been in a workforce for quite some time, or perhaps we're just recently getting hired. A very pressing issue that we could see is that first generation folks, and I bring this because I have experienced this, is that we may have difficulty negotiating a salary. Perhaps we may do work for a lower wage or a lower salary. So, question for all the panelists, and I would actually like to have all 3 of you answer. How would you negotiate a salary or a raise? And then secondly, how would you take into account, when maybe something's not right because you are a woman, you are, of something else, something about your diversity is just preventing people. How do you negotiate? How do you acknowledge that something isn't right? And I'd like to open this up for everyone.
Cool. I can start with like how I negotiated my salary because it was something that I was very nervous about. I think compensation can be a very difficult conversation to have. So for context, I interned at Beck Technology, so I was working hourly as an intern, and then when I started full time, I was put onto salary. And something that was really helpful was that so it's more of a kind of raise rather than starting at a new company, which was a huge benefit because I had people in the company that I already knew and trusted and were in similar roles as me. So I could go to them and be like, hey, what's your salary? And being open about what those salaries look like and having those conversations. And then before going into negotiation salaries, having your own range in mind. So the number that you offer is always going to be higher than the number you'll accept. And so kind of having that, like, this is what I want, this is what I'll accept, and going into it with that mindset and having a list of your accomplishments. For me, I was specifically list of accomplishments at that company, clients I've impacted, efforts I've done within the company so that they recognize your value and can put it into terms of salary.
I like that. Having some coworker, opinions. I could see that a little bit from branding. Noticing a little theme there. But opening this up now for Julio and Contessa.
Sure, I'll go
Negotiation.
next. So I always tell people when they're getting ready to negotiate for a new role or thinking about an increase in their salary, do your research. I always like to leverage resources. So one of the resources I'll share with this group is salary.com. I love that resource because it gives you information as far as salary range for the role that you're looking at, geographically. I mean, it breaks it down for you so that way you take all of this great information and you have ongoing conversations with whomever you need to. The other thing I'll say also when I'm negotiating for a new role is take into account the total compensation package, not just your salary, your benefits, if there's going to be any bonus involved, any your medical benefits, all those things that comprise your entire compensation. So that way you have a really good understanding of this is the salary range, as Noelle mentioned, that I want to talk to you about. And don't be afraid of asking for the salary range for the role itself, because that way you can, again, have that information. So when you start having the official negotiation conversation, you have everything that you need. So that way you can make the best educated guess in regards to here's where I want to be based on my experience and what you're offering with this particular range. And don't be shy about that because you bring a lot of potential to the role and values. So don't undervalue yourself on the money side of things as well. Be confident, as Tessa mentioned earlier. It's not arrogance, is that I built up all this great experience. Here's where I'm at as far as my total compensation.
I love it. I love it.
Julio is exactly right. One is doing your homework, doing a homework. And I'll say for women, we struggle a lot in this area. Men will negotiate first, whereas a lot of women will not. And so one of my mentors told me that I interview like a guy. So I was like, okay, that's hilarious. That's fine. So be it. One is knowing, and then again, knowing your brand, knowing your worth, and as Julio said, understand the value, because what you're pitching is the value that you can bring to that organization. And people need to understand that there's only two forms of negotiation: going in and going out. So that's the only time you really need to go to negotiate well. Now, when you're in the company, talking about raises and stuff like that, that is showing the value, showing the things that you've brought forth. Anything that's gone up and beyond the call of duty, because they don't want to lose, a great value add to the organization. And when you do that, don't hesitate. I still reach out to some of my mentors that I know that have had bigger positions than me. And I'll bring the deal to them and say, okay, what am I missing? And every time I think that I got the game down pat, I have the game down pat, they will always find something else. What did you think about this, and this? I'm like, wow, okay, I didn't think about all that. Let me go back. And so it's okay to to really bounce that off of some of your mentors, some of your coaches that have been in similar positions before, that have been in higher positions than you, because they always will see it from the inside out. I will say from a hiring manager standpoint, I can honestly say there have been occasions where I may have had one female on the team, and I noticed in one case where she was the lowest paid, and I'm talking about at least 10,000, which means they brought her in lower. And so the company I was with at the time had funds for what they call the diversity equity uprighting. And so was able to get that uprighted with that, because it was just, and she was one of the strongest people on the team. So if you have good leadership, they're going to recognize and making sure that there's not that kind of disparity within the organization as well.
And I'll add a thought to this great discussion. Don't be afraid to, I think the perception sometimes is that once you're given an offer that that's the only opportunity you have, you can go back and forth in the discussion. The first offer that you hear from shouldn't be the final offer, especially if there's opportunities, as Tessa mentioned and Noelle, that I want to talk about this, or I want to add another component into the salary letter or offer. So don't be shy about that, especially if something just doesn't seem right. You can do your research, go have a conversation with someone that you trust or value, and that way they can give you their perspective and then renegotiate or have ongoing conversation. It's not a one and done deal when it comes to your salary.
I just have one quick point of advice since y'all reminded me of this. Something I learned is that perhaps as you, climb your socioeconomic ladder, you may come across, careers, jobs where you might have multi-stage interviews. And the advice I got from that is that you have the leverage to negotiate for more. A company is not going to give you two, three, four types of interviews, panelists, and groups just for you to say no. take that into account. They've invested a lot of time in you, and for you to reject their offer, that's going to hurt them. It's in your favor and in your power to leverage for a higher negotiation. So, all the panelists, keep that in mind. But I have a very specific question directed for Noelle. You
Okay.
did say you were a first generation Filipina who is a data analyst. So, how do you feel in being a more technical role? So, this is specifically for you, and then we'll open it up again once more. So, how
Yeah.
do you
So,
feel?
oh, was there more to the question? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Laura.
It's fine. I was just going to reiterate. How do you feel in this more technical role?
Yeah, I think something that was really hard about being in a technical role is there's not a lot of people that look like me or not a lot of examples of leadership. And so something that's really helped is finding outside organizations. So I'm a part of DFW's Alliance of Technology and Women. That's actually where I met Tessa. And so kind of having those outside perspectives, like we talked about, people that you value and you trust to do routine gut checks and be as a kind of sounding board for ideas and situations is really helpful, especially when, you know, you're the only one that looks like you when you go into a meeting. That can be very scary and very intimidating. You know, a recent meeting happened and I messaged Tessa. I was just like, hey, I'm really worried about this meeting. It's with leaders and they're all white men. I'm very intimidated. And she was a great sounding board and the meeting went a lot better. And I felt more confident going into it.
Thank you, Noelle. Now I'm going to ask a little bit of a much more, bigger question. But hypothetically, let's say you inherit a team, and your entire team is homogenous. So let's consider the fact that, maybe it's all men. Maybe it's all, white Americans. There might not be the diversity you're thinking about, looking for. It's something, again, we're considering this. But how do you begin to diversify your team? And on that same note, in that situation, if you're recruiting and the best candidate does not help diversify your team, how would you proceed? The microphone is up for anyone.
Been there. In my roles, I've been there. I mean, engineering, technical companies, been there. The main thing is this. So you don't want to let necessarily diversity force you into something. You always want to have the best candidate. No doubt about it. The first question I always ask, and this is where I go back to, I'll say like a Julio here at TA, is like, is that all you brought me, right? We can't find any other diverse, good candidates out there. So you want to make sure that you have a good pool and you're searching it out. And the thing I always challenge my TAs on, or if I'm using external recruiters, is that, and they say, there's not many. Yeah, but that don't mean there isn't any. So that means now you get paid. They get paid for finding those candidates and they're there, right? You just have to know where to look. Or the question is, are you even looking for it? Because what you're not looking for, you will never find. And so those are the type of questions that I have. Now, again, and I made this joke before, if a person comes up there and can, if they have a peg leg, a patch over one eye, and a parrot on the shoulder, but they can make me money, they're on the team, right? I may not be able to put them in front of a customer that way, but I'll find a spot for them. And so for me, the biggest bias color for me is green. It's making money.
That's a very valid answer.
And for me, I'll follow up on Tessa's great points. I'm always curious, even before we get to that point where we have that discussion about having more people on someone's team, what relationships are we cultivating and exploring out in the community? And I always have conversations with people that I'm coaching, whether they're at the executive level or other fellow professionals in HR, is sometimes we need to get uncomfortable going into areas of the city or our community that we typically don't interact with. So that way we can start learning about all of these different diverse candidates that we haven't even thought about. It's just too easy to stay in the college campus. It's too easy to stay in the community as far as some nonprofit organizations. But have we talked about these groups right here that we haven't even tapped into? And again, we're assuming a lot of things that they don't have as far as the skills that we're trying to look for. So I always challenge folks, what about these folks? What about these individuals? Why aren't we even connecting with them and educating them, in what we have to offer? And so I always like to challenge the status quo, because diversity is this big topic. So what are we talking about? If we're really going to go after this in our entire community, as far as all the people we're trying to represent, then we need to talk to all of those people, not just a certain segment of those people.
I've appreciated all the conversations regarding branding, standing up for yourself and recognizing imposter syndrome. But there's something I want to touch upon boundaries. And in particular, as we did acknowledge some stereotypes, how do you begin to identify your boundaries? Just very quickly for myself, I know for a fact that I'm a morning person. And although that may sound very simple, I need to let my boss, my employer know, hey, please recognize that like I will put my best work and I will put my best effort, but please give me the schedule that I work best at. I do not like having fluctuating schedules. Weekends I need to have them off. Monday to Friday, I'm all for you. I'm here to work you and serve you my best. That's just a very simple case of boundaries. So I open this up for everyone. How do you set your boundaries for yourself? Let's just start there. How do you set your own boundaries?
For me, the all out deal breaker, no matter what happens, is respect or lack thereof. That's the one thing that is a big deal breaker for me. I can usually tolerate just about everything else from a boundary standpoint. The one thing I will say is that, as you take on different jobs, as you quote unquote move up the ladder, get more responsibilities, those time boxes become a lot more fluid because you're on a lot more. And so it just depends on where you want to go, right? It's the negotiation points of where you kind of give and the trade-offs, and that's fine. But the one thing that for me, from a boundary perspective, no matter if I have a gruffy, boss, and I've been in some gruffy situations, is that there is a boundary of dignity and respect, because any team or any organization that does not have respect is like a person with no soul. It's just a shell, and nothing good can come from it.
So
Wow.
for me,
Mhm.
I love that. So for me, it's communication styles, because I recognize that people communicate differently at work. So I've worked with leaders where they're very data driven, and so I focus my conversations and show them the data and how I'm bringing value based on that data that they're trying to move forward. The other thing too is that it's okay that I have a different communication style than you do. It's just how do we work together so that way we can accomplish our goals? Because if I'm also a very strategic thinker and I love data as well, and if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody that's more social by nature, I make sure that I also meet them halfway and adjust my approach as well. So that way I get to know that person. Again, going back to that branding aspect, be empathetic and sympathetic and connect to your people that you're responsible for. And that way we have a moment of personal connection, and then we focus on the work. Because if you're going to work with other folks and you're very rigid in the way you communicate or interact, it's not going to be a successful relationship for anybody, whether you're the most respectful person or not. And so adjusting the way you interact and communicate with folks is a big deal for me as far as my boundaries.
You're welcome to add on, Noelle.
Okay, sure. I guess for boundaries, yeah, I mean, Tess and Julio covered a lot of it, just like having those kind of like realistic or not realistic, but like having those tough conversations and communicating appropriately with your managers. Something that's helped me with like boundaries is having somebody on my company that I know will advocate for me and kind of like step in if a boundary is crossed, like when those moments get contentious or there isn't that respect that I kind of expected, somebody to stand up for me is really helpful. So finding those kind of advocates within your company is really helpful. I know also for me, I have a really hard time setting my own personal boundaries, just being like, okay, it's time to log off, especially, working from home during COVID. It's like, I can do another hour of work. And so I think this piece of advice actually came from Tessa herself. So it was like, when it hits a certain time, log off, close your computer, do something for yourself. And, that way there is those kind of distinctions in your day rather than I go from work on my computer to my bed right next to it.
Thank you. To transition out of the conversation of boundaries, this might get a little more tough, perhaps a little more personal. But when do you recognize that perhaps they're asking more of your time? You're not being fairly compensated. And this may lead into the questions of when do you recognize that you're being exploited? And I feel this is a very important question to address because, again, As I did mention, we do have a lot of first gen folks in in the chat. But I need to know from y'all, maybe early in your career, maybe as you entered, when did you notice that, people are really pushing that boundary to the point where it's starting to cross into exploitation? We need to recognize the signs. This is opened up for anyone.
So I'll go first here. Just a couple of examples that I would like to share with everybody. So early on in my career, I was the person that was trying to impress everyone. So I would say yes to everything and anything. And so I learned very quickly to stop doing that, because when you do that, you're putting yourself in a very compromising situation where you're working the long hours, and then people just expect that as the norm from you. And then after a while, it does start catching up to you physically and intellectually and emotionally, because you're working these long hours at night on the weekends. And then you're also seeing that the same expectation is not true of the rest of your colleagues. And you're going, wait a minute, why am I doing all of this heavy lifting for the team, and yet everybody else is just doing part of it, and we're still getting paid the same or compensated the same? So that's something that you need to think about. The other aspect that I would share also from an expectation is having that conversation with your manager. What are your expectations of my work product? So that way they can tell you that, you know what, if I send you an email at 10 o'clock at night, you don't have to answer that. It's just that that's when I work best, and I'll shoot it over to you, but I'm not expecting you to answer that. So have that upfront, candid conversation with your manager as far as what is your expectation of me as far as my work product. The other aspect also is, again, we talked about this a little earlier, is creating a safe space where you're going, wait a minute, Lauro here. I'm seeing that you're treating folks a little bit differently, and then you're treating me differently as well. We need to have a conversation about that. You know, when you have those candid conversations, it's very helpful. So that way you make sure that you're understanding perception or miscommunication or misinterpretation as well.
Thank you. I just want to address that we are, starting to close in. So if one more panelist, if they'd like to, feel free
I
to
would
answer
say,
the question.
yeah, I would say for the people on this call, and the whole thing about diversity, this is where it really gets a little bit, I'll say on a sharper edge for us, especially with everything that just happened. You got to watch being exploited when it comes to the D&I, because you're not D&I, and you cannot be the D&I for every company just because you're a minority. And you put forth those efforts, but that's not what you're getting paid to do. And you have to have the D&I and the right people in the places to do those jobs on behalf of the organization. And that becomes a very, I'll say a very gray area that a lot of companies step on. And I don't know, sometimes they always mean to do it, but it's almost a reactionary thing. And so this is where you have to have that crucial conversation of, I'm not the branding carrying the D&I, again, being exploited, just being that tokenism side of it. Now, it's good to have those conversations, get involved with your diversity groups, but you got to make sure that they're doing the right things and just not picking someone because of the way you look. To try to do that representation and carry that kind of weight.
Yeah. I think it, I just wanted to bounce off of what Tessa was saying, and what Julio was talking about was like, because that actually recently happened in our company. We're, trying to push for diversity and education within our teams. And we're doing our lunch and learn. And the person who's leading it was just like, I'd really love it if this person spoke because, they're Black. And I was just like, assuming positive intent, and being like, cultivating that kind of safe space, being like, hey, I like where your head is at. It's not okay to single people out because of their diversity inclusion. Like, and so, taking a step back and like, what are we doing as a diversity inclusion group to encourage people, but not forcing them or being like, hey, because you are Black, Asian, a woman, we need you on this panel, because that's a lot of pressure and, exploitation on the minorities in our company. And that's not anything that we want to do, especially if we're trying to help with D&I.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing, the different ways we could identify. But very quickly, in case anyone doesn't know in the chat, DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, just in case, anybody might have questions regarding that. But I want to wrap up this conversation. Are there any resources that you would recommend for continuing to learn or grow about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Resources. any resources you may suggest. Let's take a little bit of time here because I feel like, again, all of us are in different places of our workforce experience. Some of us are entering, some of us may be in school, some of us probably have, a couple of years experience, but resources for DEI.
There's a lot of classes being given right now, a lot of from the universities, a lot of people that are now focused in that area. And I'll speak for SMU. So I know SMU here, they definitely do some of the classes. I knew a couple of the professors that were definitely focused in that area. So I would say take the classes, read the books, but the biggest part is have the conversation. One of the companies I used to work for, which is no longer there, is WorldCom. And in telecom, I loved it because it was like going to the United Nations. Every race, creed, color you could imagine. So anytime I wanted to know anything about anyone's background, culture, is it true, is it not, you could literally have that conversation just in a friendly way, And so I learned a lot. The other thing is basically just seek to understand first. Seek to understand.
I would agree with that. Nowadays too, you can focus on taking a class or a certificate program. I just took one as well as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion through the University of South Florida, and it was a very awesome experience for me. I would also say if your organization does have affinity groups, business groups, or employee resource groups, go and attend and just listen. Like Tessa mentioned, seek to understand. I would also encourage you to go out in the community. There's a lot of great nonprofit organizations that are doing phenomenal work that are so different from you, and go and learn. You might be so excited that they might connect you or align you with your passion or drive or purpose. That's another great way to learn. And also I would say, continue to identify mentors and people you trust or coaches that are so different from you, because it's so easy for us to connect with people that look like us, that have similar life experiences. But I always would also challenge you to look at for folks that are very different from you, so that way you learn from a different perspective as well. I would say create your own board of directors, so that way you learn from different perspectives, and that way you can use all of those experiences as you move forward in your career.
Yeah, I think Julio and Contessa pretty much covered a lot of it, finding those groups, advocates, something really helpful for me, going on LinkedIn and finding local groups, groups that are doing meetups so that you can open yourself to those different perspectives, passion projects as well. I've learned a lot about different things just by being a volunteer at Rise Up, and, opening yourself up to those different perspectives is such a great way to do it. If you're looking for, like individual books, I'm trying to think of good ones. I always really like memoirs, because it's such a great way to learn from a different perspective. One that I'm reading right now is Minor Feelings, which is it's written by an Asian woman about her story being Asian American. And, it's just nice hearing somebody who's been through it.
Thank you, everyone. I do appreciate your time. So to be wrapping up, our conversation for tonight, we do have 4 minutes left. So I just want to first thank you, Noelle, Contessa, and Julio. For the rest of our panelists, I'd just like to let you all know that this, was a recorded, webinar. So we'll be sharing this, the diversity resources provided, perhaps maybe even taking to some of the additional resources shared, such as the book. And we'll continue this conversation through our social media, through Rise Up. So if we can have the slides, sharing our different presentation. Thank you. I'm seeing the chat once more. But very quickly, I do want to address, the event volunteers. We have Alyssa, Crystal, Michelle, Ali, Kimberly, Noelle. We have a couple of them in the chat, in the audience right here. So we do want to thank them for helping organize this event, graphic designs, preparing conversations. So thank you to these, distinguished volunteers. And to everyone else, thank you for attending. So once again, if you're interested in joining us with Rise Up, we do offer the Job Skills Bootcamp. It's all free, it's volunteer based, and it's a weekly progression. I just want to very quickly, just once again reiterate that I was once a student. I had the chance to brush up on my resume, office skills, lots of great subjects. For our panelists, once again, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate this hour with y'all.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was a great time. Thanks, everybody.
Of course, of course. And thank you, everybody in the chat. I am reading it. Thank you for the kind words. We appreciate it.